All right, welcome back. Part two, fungal related diseases. In the big scheme of things, it's not fungi really that are our biggest concerns, but certainly we want to address them. Uh, Two major sources of infections are the tinea infections, we'll come back to, skin infections of fungi, as well as yeast infections. Most of us are not really affected or very mildly affected by fungi, but they are very good at colonizing organisms that have a poor immune system. So that's really a concern, particularly in the medical environment. In households, you might have heard of household mold. That's generally caused by too much humidity in the house, and that humidity is essentially allowing mold to grow where it should not be. So essentially adding ventilation, making sure we can get rid of that humidity. So dehumidifiers work really well. Oftentimes it's a matter of trying to figure out why is the house not venting properly. So houses are kind of like organisms. They're pretty complex in their structure. There are a variety of mushrooms that are concerning to our health, and you might have heard, a mother or grandfather or somebody say, "Don't touch that fungus, don't eat that fungus," because there are some fungi that grow right in your yard and out in the woods, even in a park, of the genus Amanita that can kill you, and it's not a happy death. It's very toxic, and it's about 36 to 48 hours of just grueling body or organ failure. I do want to mention that the last bullet there, that some Amanita, if dried properly, are often used for recreational purposes. And in fact, the psychiatric community has come around to using some of these hallucinogens to help some of their patients with major depressive disorder, not treated by any other antidepressants. So we do know that some species are in fact hallucinogenic, so mildly toxic, but doesn't kill you. All right, tinea. Okay, I hate tinea. Tinea is actually just the name for a variety of skin infections by at least three major groups of genera of fungi. So you can see them there: Trichophyton, Microsporum, and Epidermophyton. So essentially what happens is the mycelium, which is easily contracted and spread from human to human, starts growing in that non-living epidermal layer of your tissues, and these diseases are essentially named by where they grow on your body. So that's kind of neat. So essentially, we can get these infections from each other or infected animals, and they were called tinea, which means worm, because originally they thought that this was a worm infection. So if you've heard the term ringworm, now you know why a fungal infection is called tinea, because they thought that it was actually from worms. So on the right-hand side are some very nice pictures of a variety of tinea infections of the skin. And then, of course, here on the left-hand side, we have those things. Some common names here like jock itch, which is actually Tinea cruris, which is just essentially the cruel ringworm that grows in the groin and genital area. We've got what I call toenail fungus. It gets underneath the nails, and it's essentially growing in masses in the keratin, digesting that keratin, and causes your nails to break down. Of course, tinea pedis, which is of the foot. So you can pause here and take a longer look at this, but essentially we have fungi in three different genera causing these infections, tinea. Now, one that's very, very common, and if you start looking at people's skin, like on the beach or something, or the pool, a lot of people have this one, tinea versicolor. So essentially, it makes you kind of look like you have like spots on your skin. But essentially, what we have is this infection is caused by yeast, not technically by those other three genera, and likes to grow on the high oil content of skin glands. Again, a lot of us have it. You see there, transmission epidemiology carried by nearly 100% of humans tested. It's really just innocuous, so it's not going to hurt you. But when you go out and your skin is exposed to sun, Sometimes you're more likely to see it because it'll appear different, like a lighter pigmentation, or in the individual at the top, looks like a reg pigmentation compared to the rest of the skin. All right, candidiasis, so yeast infections. So candidiasis can occur in various parts of the body. So in an infant, it might be at the mouth. So it's called thrush. If the infant is breastfeeding on a mother, then essentially the nipples can also have thrush. So we've got that. We've got, so for our individuals with AIDS, they can actually get a whole systemic Candida albicans, or essentially yeast infections, which can be very, very hard to treat, and they can kill people. And you can also get Candida infections in the throat, and of course of the urethral tract of males, but also in the vaginal vestibule of females. So there's some signs and symptoms there. So if you're not really familiar, then you want to take a look at that. The last point there, so women with diabetes are susceptible to vaginal yeast infections because the sugar content of their secretions of their vagina are going to be higher in sugars. And so we know one of the things that fungi really like is, energy to grow on. And so yeast loves sugars. So when you think about, if you're going to ferment grape juice, that grape juice is high in sugar. So the yeast is using that sugar to essentially make its own energy. And if it's in a low oxygen environment, then we have anaerobic respiration, or essentially we have what we call fermentation. So we get the making of carbon dioxide and then the alcohol as a result. Just want to make mention that there aren't that many antifungals on the market. And antifungals, like many of our medications, have to go to the liver to be converted. It's called the first pass. It has to be converted into a form that then we use. And because of this, antifungals tend to be, as a whole, toxic to the liver. So we don't have a lot of antifungals on the market. But we need something that's going to penetrate the cells wherever they are, if that's deep in the keratin of the toenail, or if you have a systemic yeast infection. Fungi, you might remember, they have chitin in their cell walls, so they are essentially naturally selected to live in some of those environments, harder environments, because of that chitin. Don't want to run out of time this week, but I don't want to have to go to the third part. Yes, we know that fungi affect our agricultural crops. So serious diseases cause radical reductions in crop production. So we lose food that way. There's an example there. And then also in shipping and storage. So, strawberries, they're really hard to ship. If you, especially, this time of year, we're really, wanting some fresh fruit. And you go in, since there's nothing locally right now, you go into the supermarket and you get a pack of strawberries that came from California. And if you look really closely, there might be one that's already colonized with mycelium, because you can see it. And very quickly, that infection is going to spread to the other strawberries. So it's so important to come home, get that one out, and just not wash the rest of them, because if you make your strawberries too wet, then you're giving essentially the fungi that moisture that they need to grow. Okay, I love fungi. Fungi decompose organic matter, returning minerals to the soil, so rotting fungi. Also some bacteria. We know that fungi can be beneficial, so they form symbiotic relationships with tree roots we call mycorrhizae, so that's awesome. We also know that we're engineering them to make antibiotics for us. Penicillium is one of those. So there's a whole set of antibiotics that are actually fungal in origin. So if you have a fungal allergy, then you're going to want to be careful about what kinds of antifungals you take. Antibiotics, because some of those antibiotics came from a fungal origin. And of course, we eat mushrooms. It's good. Yeast, I like products made from yeast, like bread, rolls, and of course, champagne, wine, and so on. All right. Next up, the protozoa. Proto means first or primitive. Zoa, like zoology, means animals. So these individuals originally were described as being primitive animals, about 12,000 species of them. In general, most of these are harmless to us, but the ones that are not harmless cause some serious pathogens. So, and some serious infections. So let's take a look. Just like with our fungi, we want to characterize what is a protozoan. So the biggest characteristic of a protozoan is that they move. Okay, they can move by pseudopodia, they can move by cilia, they can move by flagella. Okay, just wanted to mention pseudopods being something new to your vocabulary, perhaps. They are heterotrophic. Animals are heterotrophic, so it makes sense if we're going to call these primitive animals that they are also heterotrophic. And in fact, they can scavenge dead plant and animal debris, just like our fungi, and even graze on bacteria and algae. So again, they are using the substrates that they are exposed to. So pathogenic species, what makes them different? They can live on the fluids of their host. They could just be in the plasma, the blood, or the digestive juices, and essentially, or they could actively feed on tissues. So we're going to take a look at that. The main limiting factor for protozoa is the actual water. So they need some kind of aqueous medium in order to live and survive and reproduce. And they're good at living in extreme environments. Let's take a look at a general life cycle of protozoa because this explains a lot, right? If you look at the top of the figure, number 1, the trophozoite, you already know that tropho means feeding. So zoite is referring to the fact that it is a actively moving feeding stage. Okay, so this trophozoite can move around. It essentially can eat food. It's doing its thing. It's living its life. And when environmental conditions get bad, this trophozoite literally is going to round up. It's going to stop moving. It's going to secrete a cyst wall. And this cyst is going to be a dormant resting stage. So much like we had endospores in bacteria that we talked about last week. So this is kind of like that. It is a resting cell that can hang out during tough times. And when times get better, boom, it's ready to go. So we have our early cyst, our mature cyst, it's dormant. And then when conditions get better, so that means moisture is increasing or the nutrient they needed, whether it was nitrogen or sulfur or whatever, then they're going to come out of that cyst and become reactivated. So the trouble with these things is that cysts are hard to get rid of. So they are naturally selected to be resistant, to be, essentially not easily killed. So these cysts can be, transported in the air, water, whatever. Okay, so I highlighted here the particular pathogenic protozoa I want you to be familiar with. So this one is a sexually transmitted infection called Trichomonas vaginalis, and both males and females can carry it. Generally speaking, it causes more issues in the female than the male. The second big one is the genus Plasmodium, particularly of 3 different species you see there, causing malaria. And then the last one is Toxoplasma gondii, which causes toxoplasmosis. So I don't have a lot of time left in this video, so I may cut this one short and start the next one. But you do see at the bottom of this figure, far left-hand side, there's amoeboid type protozoa. They're using those fake feet, so those pseudopods. We have ciliated protozoa like Euglena. That one is not harmful to humans, but that's one that, I'm sorry, not Euglena, Paramecium. A lot of people know Paramecium because of the cilia all around their outer membranes. Then, of course, a couple other types here. But yeah, they can move around. They act like animals, primitive animals. They need energy, so they eat and digest food. They need some kind of aqueous medium to grow in. And of course, they are simple, these simple cells. So I will start on the next part in just a little bit. Thank you.